The perfect morning has no body in it. It begins before sunrise. Water measured, food calculated, exercise completed, messages answered. Every minute proves discipline, yet one small interruption produces fury. A late train, an unexpected hunger, a tired afternoon. Ordinary life feels like sabotage. The person inside this morning looks admirable from a distance. Up close, everything living has become a problem to manage. Appetite is evidence of weakness. Rest must be earned. Emotion is inefficient. The body is allowed to appear only as a project. Carl Jung gave psychology a language for what consciousness rejects. Marion Woodman carried that problem into a place many readers of Jung treated too abstractly. What if the rejected life is not only an idea, emotion, or dream figure? What if it is the body ordered to perform a personality it can no longer sustain? Woodman became one of the most widely read Jungian analysts of feminine psychology, addiction, and embodiment. She did not discover the body for psychology, and her symbolic framework must not be confused with medical science. Her importance is more precise. She exposed how perfection can disguise a split between conscious control and lived bodily reality. Why does perfection feel safer than participation? When does discipline become possession by an ideal? And what did Woodman add to Jung that a psychology of symbols alone could leave unfinished? Woodman was born in Canada in 1928. She spent more than 20 years teaching English and drama before training at the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich, graduating in 1979. She practiced as an analyst, wrote books including The Owl Was a Baker's Daughter, Addiction to Perfection, The Pregnant Virgin, and Bone, and later developed embodied group work with collaborators. This route matters. She did not meet Jung as a young disciple, and Jung had died long before her Zurich training. The accurate relationship is post-Jungian. She worked inside the tradition, then extended its attention to psyche and soma, especially in the lives of women and in experiences of compulsion, disordered eating, and bodily alienation. Her biography is not proof of every psychological claim. It does explain why the work feels less like a detached system than an argument with abstraction. Teaching, analysis, illness, dream work, and collaborative movement practices press the same question. Can a person become more conscious while treating the body as raw material? The internet version of perfectionism is usually a problem of standards. Lower them, schedule rest, accept mistakes. Woodman's account is stranger. The perfectionist ideal can become an inner authority that values purity, control, and transcendence over appetite, rhythm, limitation, and relationship. In that arrangement, the body becomes the embarrassing part, hungry when the plan says no, exhausted when achievement demands more, aging when identity requires permanence, emotional when the persona requires calm. The conscious person says, "I only want to be better." The body hears, "You may exist when you stop inconveniencing me." The hidden goal is not health. It is exemption from being a creature. That is a different charge against perfection. The problem is not merely that the standard is too high. The standard may be designed to eliminate dependency, uncertainty, and change. It promises a life without need. Because no body can deliver that life, the project continually manufactures failure. Woodman's title, Addiction to Perfection, names this compulsion, but the word addiction requires care. In her work, it belongs to a symbolic and analytic account of repeated control, shame, and hunger. It is not a license to diagnose every ambitious person, nor does it replace clinical definitions of substance use or eating disorders. If the overlooked thinkers who carried Jung into lived experience interest you, keep beyond Jung close. Woodman's next move is where a self-improvement problem becomes a conflict over who is allowed to speak. Jung's model already joined psyche and soma more closely than a simple mind versus body picture suggests. His psychology treated instinct and image, matter and meaning, as entangled. So Woodman's argument is not that Jung forgot bodies entirely. The subtler problem is what happens in practice. Jungian language can drift upward into archetypes, myths, and transformations as if meaning occurs somewhere above muscle, appetite, and breath. A dream becomes an elegant story, a symptom becomes a symbol. The interpreter becomes fascinated while the actual person remains unfed, sleepless, frightened, or ill. Woodman pulled the symbolic image back through sensation. A dream of a starving child is not solved by assigning the child an archetypal definition. The dreamer can also ask where life is starved now. What happens in the throat while the dream is told? What pace dominates the day? Which feeling is converted into control before it can be experienced? But the body is not a codebook either. Pain can have medical causes. Fatigue can come from sleep deprivation, infection, medication, poverty, caregiving, or work. Hunger is not a symbol that requires interpretation before food. Woodman's strongest insight survives only when symbolism does not erase material reality. Her model becomes clearer as a loop. An ideal promises relief from shame, uncertainty, or chaos. Control produces temporary safety. Because the body cannot remain permanently controlled, it eventually resists, tires, hungers, or collapses. That resistance creates more shame. The ideal then demands stricter control. Perfection appears to solve the disorder it helps maintain. Consider an illustrative example. A woman cannot deliver an imperfect presentation. She edits until 2 in the morning, ignores hunger, and enters the meeting shaking. A productivity analysis says she needs a deadline. That may be true, but it does not explain why stopping feels dangerous. A Woodman-inspired reading asks what ideal owns the room. Perhaps flawless performance promises immunity from criticism. Perhaps the polite persona cannot admit anger at impossible demands. Perhaps exhaustion is not a mysterious message at all, but the predictable result of overwork. Several explanations can coexist. The important turn is that the body is neither enemy nor oracle. It is a participant. Shaking does not issue a command, but it changes the evidence. Hunger does not settle the meaning, but it must be answered literally before it is interpreted symbolically. Embodiment is a relationship among sensation, image, thought, history, and ethical choice. This midpoint correction prevents a second form of perfection. A person can become perfect at listening to the body, tracking every sensation, and turning embodiment into another performance. Then, healing becomes the new ideal, and ordinary inconsistency produces the old shame in softer language. Woodman's later BodySoul Rhythms work, developed with Mary Hamilton and Ann Skinner, brought together dream imagery, movement, voice, art, and group process. The Marion Woodman Foundation describes a collaboration rooted in embodied soul work. The aim was not polished performance. An image was breathed, voiced, or moved so that its bodily dimension could enter awareness. Imagine the woman from the presentation moving the posture she uses at work. Her shoulders narrow. Her breath rises, her hands become rigid. She does not need to conclude that the body stores a single hidden truth. She can notice that flawless competence has a shape. Then she tries a different movement. Feet wider, jaw relaxed, one hand open. The gesture does not cure perfectionism. It provides contrast. The conscious identity now has more than one bodily possibility available. The image of competence can change from armor into support. The useful action may be small and unglamorous. Eat, sleep, submit the work at a chosen threshold. Notice the shame that arrives when control ends. Ask whose judgment appears in the mind. Test whether the feared catastrophe actually follows. The shame, rather than the imperfect slide, may be the guardian of the system. It warns that without perfect performance, belonging will disappear. Control then feels like care because it promises protection from exile. Woodman was interested in the symbolic language around that conflict, including what she called the feminine. In her tradition, feminine and masculine often name psychic principles rather than simple biological categories. She linked the feminine with receptivity, embodiment, relationship, and the capacity to bear process. That vocabulary can illuminate some cultural patterns, but it also carries assumptions from its time. Treated rigidly, it can reproduce the very split it wants to heal. Women assigned to body and feeling, men assigned to mind and action. A responsible reading does not turn archetypal language into universal gender law. The more durable question is broader. Which human capacities does a person or culture reward, and which does it exile? Action without receptivity becomes compulsion. Receptivity without discrimination can become surrender. Form without change becomes a prison. Change without form cannot hold a life. Perfection hates that complexity. It wants one correct body, one correct rhythm, one correct identity. Embodied life answers with seasons, appetite, injury, pleasure, dependency, and change. This is why Woodman's work cannot be reduced to relaxation or permission to indulge every preference. A body also learns routines, tolerates effort, and carries obligations. The difference is whether discipline remains responsive. Training that adjusts to injury is not the same as a regime that treats injury as betrayal. A deadline negotiated with sleep and health is not the same as a deadline used to prove that need has been conquered. Embodiment does not remove form. It asks form to stay in contact with the life it is supposed to serve. This is also where factual and clinical boundaries matter most. Woodman's books addressed eating disorders and addiction through Jungian symbols. Scholars and memorial accounts recognize her pioneering role in bringing these subjects and the body into Jungian work. That historical importance does not make her interpretations clinical protocols. Eating disorders and substance dependence can be life-threatening conditions requiring qualified, evidence-based treatment. Symbolic meaning does not replace nutritional rehabilitation, medical monitoring, psychotherapy, medication when appropriate, or practical safety. A metaphor can deepen understanding only after it stops competing with care. The late status reversal now appears. Woodman can look like a specialist in feminine psychology at the edge of Jung's large map. In fact, she identified a central danger in every psychological system. A person can use spiritual or intellectual ideals to become less present to life. Even individuation can become a fantasy of perfect completion. That correction reaches beyond dieting, work, or appearance. A person can pursue the perfect relationship by refusing conflict, the perfect spiritual practice by refusing anger, the perfect political identity by refusing doubt, or the perfect recovery by refusing setbacks. The content changes. The war against limitation remains. Woodman's embodied emphasis does not solve that war by reversing it. The body does not overthrow consciousness. Sensation joins the conversation. Thought still evaluates. History still matters. Other people still have claims. Professionals still provide knowledge unavailable to private symbolism. If this distinction between symbolic meaning and literal care matters to you, stay with me. Beyond Jung is most useful when an Heir's insight remains strong enough to survive its limits. Return to the perfect morning. Place a metronome on the desk. It clicks at the pace of the ideal. Faster, cleaner, more. Every completed task allows 1 second of relief before the next demand arrives. Now remove one task, not the essential medication, the paid work, or the meal. Remove the unnecessary proof. The room becomes quiet enough to hear a second rhythm. It is not mystical, it is simply human. Breath, hunger, fatigue, interest, reluctance. None is a command, each is information. The conscious person still decides what to do, but the decision is made with the body present rather than after the body has been silenced. This is what Woodman added to the Jungian inheritance. She made it harder to speak about wholeness while remaining divided from material life. She asked the symbol to acquire weight, breadth, limit, and consequence. The perfect person wants to complete the analysis and become invulnerable. The embodied person may become more accountable precisely because vulnerability can no longer be hidden behind achievement. Woodman's question is not whether you can lower your standards enough to feel comfortable. It is whether the person those standards are constructing has enough room to remain alive. Where in your life does control still call itself care, even though your body experiences it as punishment?